I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that was a Bigfoot. Let me tell you a story. Welcome to another episode of Bigfoot Campfire Stories. This story comes to us fresh from the deer hunting grounds near Sacramento, California. A young hunter named Pete loses his quarry to what he thinks is a hungry, scavenging bear. Let's hear his story. Well, it was opening season for rifle in our county, and I decided I wanted my first kill that weekend, so I packed up my camping gear and I headed for the family land I used to hunt each year. I've been coming to this same ranch since I was a boy, and I've hunted this land on a regular basis all that time. We had just been out for bow season, and I hadn't taken an animal yet. There were lots of chances to shoot, a couple of misses, but I won't just kill any deer. I want the right deer. Anyhow, Friday night I rode out to the property, and I set up camp. It being late September and in the foothills, the temps got pretty cold at night, so I just got my tent set up and early enough snuggled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off to sleep, as 4 a.m. would come very early. Well, I didn't make it to 4 a.m. before I was awakened by something roaming around my camp. There were plenty of bears and an odd lion or two on the property, so I grabbed my revolver and I opened up the tent flap to have a look. I shined my headlamp around and I couldn't see anything, so I stepped out and I made a bunch of noise. I must have spooked whatever it was, because it ran off in the night, unseen, with some kind of a weird whoop. Well, it was already 3:15 a.m., so I just got back in the tent and started getting into my hunting gear. I started out to my deer stand about an hour before sunup. With my scent mast, I climbed on the old tree stand. The old slat ladder nailed to the tree, and it's gotten a bit wobbly since last season. I have to remember to bring some nails and a hammer up on my return. Well, I perched myself in the stand, and I set up for a long wait, and as usual, I was right. Noon passed, so I broke out some food and my coffee thermos and warmed up a bit, knowing much wouldn't be going on until late afternoon. Just about sunset, I got lucky, and I saw a nice buck, about a 4x4, and he was past his prime. Just the kind I like to harvest. So I brought up my .308 and I took the shot. I hit it right in the organ pouch. There was no way it could have lived, but it turned sideways and took off in a flash, so the chase was on before it got dark. Well, I used the tree rope to lower down my rifle, and I climbed down the slat ladder until the second to the last slat broke and I fell some 6 feet to the ground. No, not earth-shattering, but painful all the same. Well, it took me a few minutes to gather myself up and get my rifle before I could start to track the deer, but I honestly couldn't imagine that it could have gone far. I found the impact spot, and I could see a thick blood trail leading over towards the meadow. Well, as I walked, the trail got thicker and more red, and it had to be there somewhere. Well, there was a small cliff on the other side of the meadow, so I walked around it, but the blood trail went directly over the edge, so it must be laying at the bottom of there somewhere. Now, I was about 3/4 of a mile from my tree stand, and I had come around the corner, and I could hear animal noises. Something was eating at my deer kill, I was sure of it. So I picked up the pace, and as it came into sight, sure enough, there was a bear eating my kill with his back to me. Well, I yelled out, "Hey, bear!" and I shot off around with my rifle. I had a bear tag too, so I figured I'd just shoot me a bear as well, so I prayed the .308 would be enough. Well, I leveled up my rifle, and I looked down through the scope, and the bear stood up, turned around, only this wasn't a bear. I was only 20 yards from this thing, standing at least 8 feet tall, a monstrous sight, with the deer's liver in its hand, still feeding, as it looked directly into my eyes, still chewing bits from its last bite. I'll admit I froze in place. I wanted to shoot, but I couldn't. My scope was right on its head. It surely would go down in a heap, but for some reason I just couldn't pull the trigger. I lowered my rifle, and the Bigfoot still stood there as if it was waiting for something. Then it let out a scream that shook me to my core, and it began running in my direction. Well, I turned in fear, and I began to run. I took off as fast as I could on my injured legs, and I looked back to see that the Bigfoot had stopped and returned back to the kill. Well, I ran right past my tree stand, and I continued the other half a mile to my campsite. I just grabbed the most expensive stuff. I got back in the truck, and I raced back to town. I called my brother Ricky over to the house, and I told him what happened. With it being nearly 10 p.m. already, we decided it was best to wait until morning. The conversation sort of went like, "I ain't going out there tonight, and neither are you, so come get me in the morning." Well, at daybreak, I went ahead and drove out and drove over to Ricky's house, picked him up, and we drove back over to the property. When we got back to my campsite, my tent wasn't there. Most of my gear I left behind was tossed all around. Well, we left that area and we walked into the deer stand, and I'd shown Ricky where the slide had broken, and I came down and busted my ass, and then we went down to track the deer. Well, we walked in further to where the cliff was, and I showed him the blood trail that went down over the edge. Only when we got down to the area where the deer had been, there was no Bigfoot, but there was a half-eaten deer carcass with the hindquarters and all the organs completely missing. Ricky had noticed it first, but they were very large, human-like tracks leading the other way from the carcass, down a very steep embankment leading down towards the creek. Well, we decided to try and track them, but it wasn't a trackway. It was more of a track here and a track there, and before too long, they were just gone. Because we didn't know what had been feeding on the deer, we decided to just let it lay where it was and let the scavengers finish it off. It wasn't going to go to waste, that's for sure. That was the last year that I gave up hunting alone. Now each year I go out with family members just to be on the safe side. Well, this young hunter found out, like many others do, that just because you think it's a fairy tale doesn't mean it won't come to life and eat you. Thanks for listening. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you.